Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. Today I am going to Scotland and we're going to do a Scotch whiskey tasting, which I haven't done for a little while. And I actually have two Scotch whiskey tastings I'm going to do this week, both from the same company, one being the Glen Scotia distillery and the other one coming from the Loch Lomond distillery. And Glen Scotia is a distillery I have been to. I've never been to the Loch Lomond distillery, although I've driven past it. The Glen Scotia is in Campbeltown, which is the fifth region in Scotland and was once known as the whiskey capital of the world. And if you've listened to the Whiskey Lore podcast, my early stories, which you can catch on patreon.com/whiskey-lore or at the Whiskey Lore podcast, then you will know that there were, some say 30. What I found in my records was it got up to around 29, and it grew, and there were a ton of distilleries there, and then Speyside came along, the railroads came along, this distillery mecca that was sitting there right on the coast and was basically quick access to the Atlantic, then lost some of its favor, and by World War I, the distilleries had all but disappeared. There were some trading off of distilleries. Glen Scotia survived all the way through all of this, whereas Springbank disappeared for a little while, came back, and there were a bunch of other distilleries. So I go through that whole drama of when they came in and when they left. Well, now there are only two distilleries there, actually three, although two of them are owned by the same company, Springbank and Glengyle, which makes Kilkerran. But there is also another distillery coming in that is under the Isle of Raasay's parent company's group that is building another distillery there in Campbeltown. So it is growing, and it's fun to see it growing again. It's one of my favorite places in Scotland to go. It's way out of the way, but if you're going to Islay, I always say, you know what, you've made the effort to get to Islay and Kennaicraig to get on the ferry. Just drive down the peninsula and go check out Campbeltown, because it's just a fun little town to walk around and to go to those distilleries. And imagine that at one point there were 30 some odd distilleries there. One of the things that I heard from a number of people over time was this thing called the Campbeltown Funk. Now, I really have been oblivious to what the Campbeltown Funk is. It's like the Jim Beam Funk. I've had people tell me there's a Jim Beam Funk. Where does that come from? Is it coming from the yeast? What is it coming from? And what is the flavor? Can you describe it? And funk maybe makes it sound derogatory, like this is not a good thing. The reality of it is that funk can sometimes just be that it's different. We can't really figure out what the heck it is, and that it's not necessarily off-putting. It's just in its own realm. And so between Springbank and Glengyle and Glen Scotia, you're probably going to get a lot of the same types of funk characteristics out of Glengyle and out of Springbank, whereas Glen Scotia kind of runs on its own. Those two distilleries actually have their own on-site floor maltings, and so they are getting their grain going through the conditions and the weather and all of that. So you're probably going to catch much more of what's going on in the atmosphere around Campbeltown, which is, again, on a peninsula. So it is getting weather coming from both sides. It is getting sea influence coming from both sides. And so that's probably part of what brings this so-called funk on. I try to read up on it a little bit and see exactly what would be pinpointed as a tasting note or a nosing note that you might consider to be the Campbeltown Funk. And what I found was that there were a variety of things. Some of them maybe sounding a little bit off-putting, such as musty, damp grass, basement, musty basement, oiliness. Sometimes people don't like an oiliness. I love an oiliness in a whiskey, so that wouldn't bother me at all. diesel fuel. That's I actually have a bottle of Glen Scotia 10-year peated that I think kind of fits in that industrial kind of flavor that maybe they're talking about there, and maybe it's where the source from where they're getting their peat that brings that on. So I had no idea what to expect out of this 10-year. Now, I've told this story many times, but when I went to Glen Scotia, one of the experiences I had there was having a chance to taste some of the spirit straight off the still. And I was amazed at how fruity it was. It was amazingly fruity. Well, that's another Campbeltown note, is kind of this fruity note that comes in. And so also maybe a little bit of a briny character that comes in. And my feeling was that the whiskey was so good straight off the still that why the heck would you even put this into a barrel? Let's just roll with it the way it is. But they did, and here's the result. Now this is whiskey that has been put in a first fill bourbon barrel, and so you're going to pick up a little bit more of the bourbon characteristics in there. Usually going to maybe pull in some caramel notes, or maybe a little bit of a char note if any of that char is left over, vanilla, those kind of notes probably coming from the bourbon barrel. And so I'm looking for the funk, and I can tell you the first thing that really comes to my nose is like a combination of apple and pear, very, very strong here. But then there is this mystery kind of a note that comes in that I think is probably confusing me a bit. It's a briny note, and so you're getting that little salty sea air kind of a note there that seems a little foreign with the pear and the apple. It's very interesting. There's also a little lemony note coming through on this as well. Wow. That's a very fragrant nose on this. This is actually 40 ABV, and I hear my bourbon friends going, are you kidding? Do they still make whiskey that low in ABV? Well, here's the thing. If you have a whiskey that may tend to go a little bit oily, it might not actually hurt for it to be down around 40 ABV. So let's give this a tasting and see what happens. Cheers. Oh, lemon grain. Yes, the oiliness. Ooh, wow. Orange kind of peeks its head up there all of a sudden. And you're left with kind of a orange rind, lemon kind of a note as you're getting towards the end. There's a ginger note coming in as well on this. One of the times I tasted this, I was getting a kind of a fudgy note on it as well. Very light. I am getting it here. It's more once it starts to dry off your palate. I have to tell you, at 40 ABV, still really nice coating of the mouth, and the finish just goes on and on and on and on. And so this is why I don't like to judge a book by its cover and say just because it's 40 ABV that it's going to be an inferior whiskey. What I am finding here is that this is a whiskey I probably would be interested in tasting at least 46%. However, it does really well at 40, and it's probably what keeps the price point lower on this, and it's a 10-year versus a 12-year and the 15-year and so on and so forth. So maybe they are trying to keep it for the value consumer to be able to afford a bottle of it and maybe not overly punch their palate. And the thing is that I do think this is be a really good introductory whiskey for people. I don't for a Scotch, especially if they like the fruity kind of sweet notes. It's not as sweet like a bourbon. There are vanilla notes in this as well, but the bourbon barrel doesn't necessarily over punctuate the flavor on this whiskey. It is much more just that really nice, almost Speyside-ish kind of a flavor coming through on this, but with those little interesting notes. As I say, I don't think the Campbeltown Funk is necessarily dominating this unless we're talking about those fruit notes. And yes, definitely has the fruit notes. Maybe a little bit of the grassy, a little bit of the briny, but they are really muted. So it's not something that, to me, is going to be off-putting. Maybe to somebody who hasn't really tasted scotches before, they might pick up on it if they have a very sensitive palate, and maybe that would turn them in some way or another. But this is a very easy drinking whiskey, really nice, wonderful flavors coming through. And I have to tell you, I had to do this review because I've been working this down pretty quickly. It is one of those that when you're just sitting there and relaxing and you want something nice and pleasant on your palate, this is a great whiskey for that. Have you had Glen Scotia 10? What are your thoughts? What do you think about the ABV level? Is that an issue? What do you get out of the Campbeltown Funk? Leave your comments below. Love to hear those. And until next time, cheers and slanjava. Really nice on the palate. Very full flavored whiskey.